In this heartwarming tale of snowbound healing and quiet grace, a weary single dad and his spirited young daughter find unexpected refuge on a land of solitary woman with a past as vast as her farmland. Through quiet kindness, shared grief, and the slow magic of found family, broken hearts begin to mend as a chance. Set against a backdrop of winter silence and slow-burning love, it's a tender reminder it's never too late to come home. So, settle in, maybe with a blanket, a warm drink, and a little quiet, because what you're about to hear isn't flashy or fast. It's the kind of story that unfolds like snowfall, slow, steady, and full of heart. A story about kindness, second chances, and the way love sometimes arrives quietly like a knock on a broken shed door. This is where our journey begins. The snow came soft that morning, like a secret. Not the heavy kind that commands silence in road closures, but the whispering kind, a gentle curtain falling over the earth, making even the sharpest edges blur. The wind hummed low through the pines. Light shimmered off the frost-covered branches, like glass dreams. It was the kind of morning that asked for stillness, and Jack Morgan was trying to remember how to be still. The truck's tires crunched through the unplowed lane. As he turned off the highway, the world behind him swallowed in white. Beside him, in the passenger seat buried in mismatched scarves and a second-hand pink coat, his daughter Lila pressed her gloved hand to the window. "Is this it?" she asked, breath fogging the glass. Jack nodded. "Yeah, Bug, this is it." He said it softly, as if louder words might break something inside them both. Ahead, the outline of the old farmhouse emerged from the snow mist. Faded blue shutters, a sagging porch, and a small shed out back leaning as though the wind had asked it to dance, and it hadn't quite stopped. It had been his uncle's house once. Then nobody's. Now somehow there's... Jack parked on the bare maples and let the engine tick itself quiet. Neither moved. Lila, 10 years old and growing wiser with grief, glanced at her father's face before asking, "Do you think Mom would have liked to hear?" Jack didn't answer right away. He reached over, brushed a strand of her dark hair behind her ear, then gave her a small smile, the kind that tried to be brave and mostly failed. She would have loved the quiet, he said, and the snow, definitely the snow, that seemed to satisfy something in her. She opened the door and stepped into the world. Inside, the farmhouse smelled of dust pine and old paint. The air was still, the kind of still that carried memories tucked in the corners. A photograph still hung above the mantel. Jack's uncle, holding a trout the size of a toddler, smiling with eyes squinted into the sun. Jack paused, hand brushing the carved of the fireplace, as if it were someone's shoulder. Lila's boots thudded up the stairs. "I called the room with the blue wallpaper." Jack smiled. Let her call it. Let her have something to call her own. He moved to the window, watching her footprints vanish beneath the falling snow. The town had seemed small when they drove through. 2 stop signs, 1 diner, a post office attached to the general store. But there was something about it that felt like exhale, like maybe, just maybe, this was where healing could begin. Quietly, slowly, like spring under snow. The next morning, Jack walked into town. Lila was at school now, 3rd grade, new backpack, 2 small boots she refused to give up. She made a friend already, a girl named Nora with wild red hair and a laugh that filled the hallway like birdsong. He passed a bakery breathing cinnamon into the street, a church bell that rang not for mass, but habit. The general store had a hand-painted sign and a wind chime made from rusted silverware. Inside it smelled like rope, firewood, and oranges. "New in town?" The owner asked, a woman with thick glasses and a cardigan that looked hand-knitted by love itself. Jack nodded. Jack Morgan. Moved into the old Callahan place. "Well," she said, pulling out a notepad, "then you'll need salt for the steps, some gloves that aren't pretending, and, if you're smart, a snow shovel that won't break on the second try." He smiled. "Yes, ma'am." She looked up. "You any good with your hands?" Jack raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" She chuckled. "Repairs, carpentry, plumbing, that kind of thing. Used to be a contractor," he said. Back before, he let the rest of the sentence stay in his chest. Some stories didn't need to be handed out like coupons. "Well, She said, scribbling a phone number on the back of a receipt. You might want to pay a visit to Grace Whitmore. She needs help with the shed. He took the slip of paper. The name rang faint like wind chimes in his memory. He'd heard it before, maybe back in town, or maybe just in the way locals mention her in lowered voices. Softly respectful, distant. She pays fair, the woman added. But don't expect tea and chatter. Grace keeps to herself. Jack tucked the number into his coat. Sometimes that's the best kind of neighbor. The Whitmore property sat on the outskirts of town, past the creek that froze like spilled milk in winter, through a wooded trail that twisted like ribbon. The gate was old wrought iron, flanked by 2 stone posts covered in moss and memory. Jack slowed as he approached the house. It was modest, surprisingly so. A 2-story farmhouse, barn red with white trim, wrapped in a snow-covered porch. The kind of place you'd expect to smell like cinnamon and hear an old radio playing in the kitchen. Grace Whitmore answered the door with sleeves rolled, sawdust in her hair, and eyes like a winter sky. Pale blue, unreadable, wide. "You're Jack?" she asked, no greeting, no fluff. He nodded. She stepped aside. Sheds out back. They crunched across the snow in silence. The wind whispered through the trees. Somewhere, a bird called out and was swallowed by stillness. The shed leaned sideways. Its roof bowed like a tired man's shoulders. Panels missing, door askew, the smell of damp wood and old hay. Storm last month didn't number on it. Grace said, I tried patching the roof myself, but the wind had other plans. Jack crouched, fingers brushing the damaged frame. I can fix it, but it'll take a few days. She nodded. I pay cash. Lunch is at noon. Don't be late. I don't reheat. He looked up, a smile threatening. Yes, ma'am. The first day was spent in near silence. Jack worked. Grace fed the goats. Snow fell. A clock ticked somewhere inside the house, loud enough to mark time across the field. It wasn't awkward. It was simple. 2 people used to quiet, sharing space without needing to fill it. At noon, true to her word, she brought out 2 bowls of stew and set them on the porch rail, without a word. He joined her. The stew was hot, thick with barley and carrot. They ate, watching the snow fall. After several minutes, Grace spoke, almost reluctantly. Your girl, Lila? Jack nodded. 10. Loves books. Hates broccoli. Thinks every snowflake has a name. Grace cracked a half smile. Smart kid. She is. He paused. Her mom passed a couple years back. We need it somewhere else. Grace didn't offer pity. Just listen, which somehow was better than any apology could be. When Jack finished the stew, he handed the bowl back. Their fingers touched, brief, warm. Something passed in that moment. Not electricity. Not romance. Something quieter. Recognition. By the 3rd day, Lila came too. She sat near the goats with a notebook, sketching, her cheeks pink from cold. Grace showed her how to hold the baby goat without startling it. Jack watched from the shed window. He couldn't remember the last time he saw his daughter laugh, without forcing it. When the hammering paused, Grace came over holding a mug of cider. You're good with her, Jack said. I like kids, she replied. They haven't learned to pretend yet. He didn't ask what she meant. On the 7th day, as Jack replaced the last board on the shed's roof, a hush settled over the field. Dusk, snow, and the kind of wind that wrapped around your ribs like old grief. He climbed down the ladder, dusting flakes from his coat. Grace stood at the porch, watching. Her coat undone, boots sunk deep in snow. She didn't speak. He approached slowly. It's done. Should hold through the next 10 winters. She nodded. Then, as if moved by something unnamed, she said, Do you believe in second chances? Jack looked at her, really looked. Not at the coat or the boots or the quiet way she held herself, but at the woman inside it all. The one who kept her house small, her words few, her world manageable. I have to, he said. Otherwise I wouldn't be here. They stood there, 2 silhouettes against the snow. Nothing more needed saying. That night, Jack returned home, boots wet, hands cracked, heart just a little warmer. Lila was asleep on the couch. Arms around a drawing of the goat Grace had helped her name Willow. He picked it up gently. taped it to the wall above the fireplace, lit the fire. He sat there for a long time, watching the flames, listening to the snow, remembering the soft moment when fingers touched, the silent understanding in Grace's eyes, the way some things don't need to be rushed, how healing, like snow, falls softly, quietly, without asking. The mornings came quiet now, not the kind of quiet that pressed in from loneliness, but the kind that let you breathe, the kind that stretched across snow-covered fields and slid gently beneath doorways, warm with the promise of something unspoken. Grace stood in the kitchen, the kettle just beginning to sing, her hands wrapped around a mug worn smooth with years. Outside the window, the frost-etched lace patterns on the glass, and the barn roof gleamed under the shy sun. She watched the shed now, not because it needed watching. It stood straight and sturdy thanks to Jack's hands, but because she found herself looking for reasons to look. Some people you didn't notice right away. They moved quiet, carried their pain like folded letters in their coat pockets. But Jack Morgan, he was beginning to feel like a page turning slowly towards something she hadn't read in a long time. The kettle whistled louder. She pulled it from the flame. From the living room came the soft scratching of pencil on paper. Lila was curled on the rug, drawing the goats again, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration. She'd become a weekend fixture now. Grace hadn't invited her the first time. Jack had simply arrived, snow-dusted, with a knock on the door and a hopeful glance downward. "She brought cookies," he'd said. I couldn't say no. Grace hadn't either. Now the girls' laughter filled corners Grace didn't know she missed. There was a scarf hanging from the coat rack that wasn't hers. A lopsided snow angel outside the porch window. Evidence of life, of noise, of childhood. She hadn't realized how long it had been since the house heard young feet. She brought 2 mugs to the table. Jack sat opposite her, still smelling faintly of cedar and cold. His gloves lay drying near the fire. He smiled softly when their hands brushed over the sugar jar. "You always make it this strong?" he asked, sipping. "I like my coffee like my winters," she said. "Unforgiving." He laughed, and it did something to the silence, cracked it just enough to let something warmer through. For a while they didn't talk. The fire snapped gently, and the goats bleated once from the barn. Lila hummed under her breath, the kind of hum that only came when the heart was at ease. Grace glanced toward the small sideboard tucked in the corner. An old envelope rested there, worn at the edges. She hadn't moved it in months. Jack followed her gaze. "Something important?" She shook her head, then nodded. "It's a letter I never answered." He waited, didn't press. That's what she liked about him. "It's from my brother," she said, voice low. "He wrote just before he passed. I never wrote back." Jack reached for his coffee. Some things don't need words to be heard. She looked at him then, really looked, not at the flannel shirt or the calloused hands, but at the man behind the eyes, the one who still looked over his shoulder when Lila laughed too loud, the one who hadn't yet allowed himself to sit in the center of the room, always keeping to the edges. "Your daughter's drawings," she said softly. "They're good. She gets it from her mom. You talk about her more now." Jack's hand paused mid-sip. "Yeah, I guess I do." She liked that. That afternoon, Grace showed them the old orchard. The trees were bare, arms stretched skyward in frozen prayer. Snow tucked in their roots. Birds darted to the branches like ink on paper. "I used to pick apples here," she said, her voice distant. "Me and my dad. We'd press cider in the shed behind the barn." Lila twirled, her red coat blooming like a petal in the white. "Can we do that next fall?" Grace hesitated, then smiled. "Maybe we can." It was the "we" that lingered. That night, the power flickered. Jack had stayed late, helping mend a chicken wire fence buried in snow. As the wind howled and the lights blinked twice, Grace moved with practiced calm, lighting oil lamps from a cupboard drawer. Lila squealed with delight. It's like a camping adventure. Grace handed her a blanket and smiled. An adventure with cocoa and extra quilts. The 3 of them settled near the fire. Shadows danced on the walls, tall and slow. Jack strummed softly on an old guitar they'd found in the attic. Fingers clumsy but tender. Lila leaned against Grace's side, eyes heavy with sleep. Outside, the snow kept falling. Grace watched Jack over the firelight, the way he watched his daughter, the way he held her joy like it was sacred. "You've done well," she said, voice hushed. He didn't answer at first, just looked down at the strings. "I've done what I could," he said. "Some days, that's all I had. That's enough." The words didn't need to be more than that. When Lila drifted off, Jack carried her to the guest room, moving with the care of someone cradling the last good thing they had. Grace watched from the doorway. Her heart pulled toward memories she hadn't visited in years. A nursery, a name that had never been spoken aloud again, a loss she had buried beneath chores and goats and unplanted fields. She turned away quietly before the tears could find her. In the morning, the sky was blue, not pale, not gray, but impossibly clear, the kind of blue you only got after a storm cleared the clutter. The snow sparkled under the light, untouched. Holy! Grace stood on the porch with her tea. Jack joined her wordlessly, hands in his coat pockets. Lila was still asleep, her drawings scattered on the floor like fallen leaves. "She dreams better here," he said, eyes on the trees. "She's safe here," Grace replied. He looked at her then, really looked, the way someone looks when they see not just a person, but a place, a harbor. Grace wasn't a woman who invited many people in. She'd spent years building walls made of work in winter and polite distance. But something about Jack had loosened the boards. And Lila had walked right in and sat on the floor. "Can I show you something?" Grace asked. He nodded. She led him to the barn, past the feed bins and hay, to a small door near the back. She unlocked it with a brass key worn from use. Inside, the air was warm. A small room, stone walls, shelves stacked with jars of preserves, and in the center, a rocking chair and an old cedar chest. "This was my mother's root cellar," she said, but it became something else after she passed. Jack ran his hand along the wood. "A memory room." She smiled. "Exactly." She opened the chest. Inside were letters, drawings, pressed flowers, a small wooden horse. Things I couldn't throw away. He looked at her then, and something in him softened. "I don't have anything like this," he said. "I left a lot behind." "You brought Lila," she said. "She's enough." Later that week, Lila asked if she could build a snow fort. Grace helped. So did Jack. They used old crates and fallen branches, carving windows and adding pine cones for decoration. By dusk, it looked like a castle made from dreams. They sat by it afterward, flushed with laughter, cheeks red, hands numb. Grace felt something in her chest shift. Not break, not crack, unfold. That night, as Jack and Lila left, Grace stood at the window long after their truck disappeared into the dusk. The envelope on the sideboard still sat unopened, but now her hand reached for it, just for a moment, maybe tomorrow. The next morning, a small package sat on her porch. No note, just twine and brown paper. Inside was a mason jar filled with dried apple slices and a drawing of the orchard, signed in pink pencil, from Lila and Daddy too. Grace held the jar to her chest. Sometimes love came like this, unexpected, quiet, wrapped in paper and softened tension. The wind had settled. It didn't howl anymore. It breathed, long and low, through the cottonwood trees and across the white fields like a memory brushing skin. The snow no longer fell in flurries, but in soft, absent-minded whispers, like it had nowhere else to be. Jack stood by the shed again. The same shed where it all began. Half fallen then, its bones tired and groaning under years of neglect. Now it stood upright and proud beneath the winter light, thanks to careful hands and stubborn hope. He ran a glove over the latch, testing the weight of it. Solid, secure. The last coat of stain had dried overnight. His breath curled in front of him in slow clouds. It was done. Behind him, the farmhouse window glowed warm. He could see Grace moving inside, sleeves rolled up, brushing flour from her hands. Lila sat at the table, tongue poked in concentration, as she built a paper snowflake. That girl could make beauty from scraps, just like her mother once did. Jack looked down at the spare hinge in his palm. He didn't need it. But he pocketed it anyway. Inside the house, time moved differently. It was a kitchen that knew how to be lived in, not curated, not designed, just worn soft from use and warmth. A crooked spoon rest, a drawer that stuck slightly to the left, a teacup with a chipped lip, but the perfect weight in your palm. This was a home stitched from memory. Grace looked up as he entered, snow still in his hair. The shed? He nodded, standing proud. She handed him a towel for his boots. I'll pretend I'm not relieved. I'd believe you less if you did. She smiled small and slow. That smile, he hadn't realized he'd been working for it all winter. Not because he needed her approval, because he needed her trust. Lila held up the snowflake. This one's to the window in the barn. Grace took it gingerly. We'll add it to the others. And just like that, it was decided. This quiet tradition that had started 3 Sundays ago. Lila made one snowflake each visit. Grace taped it to the barn window above the goats. Jack fixed something small, and they drank cocoa with clove in it. Unspoken rituals had a way of becoming sacred. That afternoon, they fixed the old rocker on the porch. It wasn't urgent. It didn't wobble dangerously. But Grace had mentioned in passing that her mother used to sit there at dusk, knitting. She never finished a single scarf, she'd said with a laugh. But the sound of those needles, click, 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 it stayed in the walls long after she was gone. So Jack had offered, and Grace hadn't said no. They worked quietly, side by side. Jack sanded the worn arms, while Grace replaced a bolt at the base. Lila wandered nearby with her dolls, her boots sinking deep into the snowdrifts, narrating elaborate farm dramas under her breath. The sun dipped lower, throwing rose gold across the porch floor. "Your hands," Grace murmured, after a long pause. "They're careful." He looked up. "Is that good?" "It's rare." He didn't answer, just handed her the screwdriver. Moments like that didn't need to be filled. That evening, the fire burned hotter than usual. Lila had gone home with her aunt for the weekend. School function, something with paper crowns and cupcakes. The house felt different without her. Not emptier, just quieter. Jack didn't leave. Neither did Grace ask him to. She brought out a second quilt for the couch and a small bottle of red wine, one she'd been saving for no reason, except that it hadn't felt like time. Tonight felt like time. Outside, snow tapped gently at the windows. Inside, the fire cracked softly like an old voice remembering its youth. Jack sat across from her, one arm draped over the back of the couch, wine glass resting in his hand. He looked tired, but in that way that meant you'd work for something worth the effort. "I used to hate silence," he said suddenly. After Julie died, it filled the house. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, loud. Grace nodded. "I know that kind of silence. I didn't expect Lila to pull me out of it. I thought I'd teach her how to survive. But she taught me how to live again." He looked into the glass. "Some days, I still get it wrong." Grace leaned forward. "Then you start over. Every morning." "You really believe that?" "I have to." She didn't say more. She didn't need to. They sipped the wine slowly. The firelight flickered between them like a quiet heartbeat. In the space between words, something stirred, not loud, not dramatic, but undeniably real. A warmth that wasn't just from the hearth. At one point, Jack reached to adjust a blanket draped near her shoulder. His fingers brushed her collarbone, just slightly. She didn't move. Later, as he pulled on his coat by the door, he paused. "You'll let me know when you're ready to read that letter?" She blinked at him, taken aback by the softness in his voice. He hadn't mentioned the envelope in weeks. She'd almost forgotten he noticed. She nodded. "Soon." He smiled gently, his breath fogging the air as he stepped into the cold. "I'll be around." She watched him walk down the path, his footprints carving a memory into the snow. The shed stood firm behind him, a quiet monument to what can be rebuilt when someone chooses to stay. 2 days passed. The wind picked up again. Not harsh, but determined. Grace found herself lingering near the window more often than usual. She baked. She mended fence maps with pencil and ruler. She stood in the barn longer than necessary. And still, when Jack returned, he caught her by surprise. She didn't hear his truck, just a knock. 2 short raps on the back door. She opened it, flour on her hands. He held up a thermos and a sheepish smile. "Trade you coffee for a story." She stepped aside. In the kitchen, he poured the coffee, and she told him about the first snowfall she remembered as a child, how her father had built a sled from scrap wood and tied it to the old tractor, how she'd screamed with laughter until her face froze, how her mother had waited with mittens warmed by the fire and cocoa that tasted like melted candy bars. Jack listened the way few people did, with his eyes, with his breath, with his whole presence. When she finished, he took something from his coat, a folded cloth. Inside it, a wooden horse, almost identical to the one in her memory chest. But this one newer, its edges smoother. "I found it in Lila's box of keepsakes," he said. She said she didn't remember where it came from. Maybe from Julie's side. He paused, but it felt like it should be here. Grace ran her fingers over the mane. It was a simple thing, but her throat tightened anyway. "Thank you," she whispered. "No," he said. "Thank you." That night, she finally opened the letter. She didn't sit down to do it. She didn't light candles or play soft music or wait for a thunderstorm. She just stood in the hallway, barefoot, holding the paper in her hands like it might dissolve. Her brother's handwriting was steady. The ink had faded a little at the edges. He had written about the orchard, about how sorry he was for leaving her with all the weight, about how he hoped one day she would forgive him, not for what he did, but for what he didn't say. "I should have told you how proud I was." It read that you stayed, that you grew something here, that you kept Mom's Grace alive in your name. She cried quietly, not the sobbing kind, just the quiet, shivering kind that feels like spring might come again, eventually. She tucked the letter into the memory chest, and she called Jack. "Can you come back?" she asked. "Just for a minute." He was there in 10. They stood on the porch again, like always. Snow fell around them, slow and deliberate. She didn't speak. She just reached for his hand, and he let her. The snow had softened, not the kind that falls like a curtain, hiding the world, but the kind that settles gently, folding the land into silence. The barn roof wore a thick, clean blanket. The trees stood cloaked and still, as if holding their breath. Grace stepped outside just after dawn, steam from her breath curling up to meet the pale light. The letter still lived in her pocket, though she'd read it twice more since that night. Her brother's words had shifted something, not erased the ache, but shaped it, like snow pressed down by footsteps. Still cold, still heavy, but now a path you could follow. She walked that path now, down toward the shed, toward the orchard, the one they had built as children, her and Ben, planting spindly trees with names they couldn't pronounce. One survived, a single twisted apple tree, bent by years of wind but stubborn in its bloom. She stopped beneath it, rested a hand on its bark, and closed her eyes. The stillness was complete. Even the birds seemed to know this moment wasn't meant to be disturbed. Behind her, bootsteps crunched across the snow. She didn't turn. Jack stopped beside her, not touching, but near. "You came," she said softly. "You asked." They stood in silence for a long moment. The wind picked up just slightly, brushing her coat, tugging at a stray lock of her hair. She turned to face him. "I need to tell you something." Jack's jaw tensed, just a flicker. He nodded once. She reached into her pocket and unfolded the letter, not to read it, but just to hold it while she spoke. "My family didn't just own this farm," she began, her voice slow, quiet. "We own most of what you see between here and Shelby Creek. Land, fields, pastures, timber. And when my brother left all behind, it came to me." Jack's brow furrowed, but he didn't speak. She looked down at her boots. The snow packed unevenly around them. "I let it go to seed. For a while. Out of grief. Out of spite. I wanted no part of what reminded me of everyone who left." Her hand tightened around the letter. "But I stayed, and I worked. Slowly. Quietly. I kept this part of it. The orchard, the barn, the house. The rest, I leased other farmers. Quietly. all under the trust my mother started. Jack exhaled, the sound more relief than surprise. So the woman with broken-down shed, he said gently, owns a few thousand acres, give or take. He chuckled, but not cruelly, not even startled, just soft, the kind of laugh people give when a puzzle gently clicks into place. And you never said anything. It didn't matter. She looked up now, eyes wide, clear, but you mattered. Later, they sat by the fire again, this time closer. The silence between them had changed, not filled but understood, a silence that had chosen to stay. Grace poured tea into mugs shaped like bells. The wind kissed the windows, then moved on, the kind of day made for remembering. Jack turned the mug in his hands. Lila asked me this morning if we were going to stay. Grace looked over. Not just here, he added, but here, with you. Grace's eyes softened, but she said nothing at first. Just let the firelight flicker in the quiet between them. I don't want you to stay because you feel obligated, she whispered. I don't, he said, or because she loves it here. I do, he said. Grace looked away, tears at the edge now, not of sorrow, just fullness. Jack reached into his coat. He pulled something out, wrapped in an old linen napkin. He handed it to her. She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a little music box, hand-carved, edges worn smooth. The crank was rusted but intact. When she turned it, the sound was faint but true, a lullaby, low and slow. My mother had one like this, she said, voice catching. I figured, Jack replied. Lila found it at a flea market with my sister. She saved it for you. Grace blinked, stunned. She said, You're like someone out of a book. That broke the dam. A soft sob, quickly stifled by her palm. I'm not, she managed. I'm just tired. Jack reached across the couch. His fingers brushed her cheek, tracing a tear away with the back of his knuckle. Me too, he whispered. But I'm tired in a way that feels less alone now. She leaned in, and this time when he kissed her, it wasn't surprising. It wasn't sudden. It was slow and warm and inevitable, like snow melting beneath the spring sun. The days that followed blurred into a gentle rhythm. Jack repaired the gate near the back pasture. Grace taught Lila how to bake the kind of bread that took all afternoon and filled the house with the smell of home. Together, they cleaned the attic and found an old trunk filled with baby clothes, letters, and pressed flowers. Grace let Lila keep a lace handkerchief embroidered with her mother's initials. In the barn, the goats gave birth to two wobbly-legged kids. Lila named them Ginger and Birch. Jack joked she should have been a poet. Grace didn't correct him because he was right. One evening, as snow flurries danced outside and dinner baked slow in the oven, Lila sat between them on the couch. She looked up at Grace. Can I call you something? Grace raised a brow. Like what? I don't know. Not Mom, but maybe something just ours. Grace blinked. Jack watched her closely. How about Gracie? Lila offered shyly. It feels like home. Grace reached out and tucked a curl behind the girl's ear. Her hands trembled slightly. I'd be honored. Jack placed his hand over Grace's, his thumb brushing the back of her wrist. It was quiet, simple, complete. Spring came slowly. It always does, in these parts. The snow didn't leave in a rush. It withdrew like a guest reluctant to go, pausing at the edges, reluctant, thoughtful. The earth beneath revealed itself inch by inch, revealing dark, damp soil like secrets remembered. They didn't rush it. They let things thaw on their own time. The orchard showed green buds, timid but certain. The goats kicked in the mud. Lila climbed the low branches with the confidence of a girl who'd found her place in the world. And Jack held Grace's hand whenever they walked the fields now. He never asked her to leave. She never asked him to stay. They just did. Together. One morning, Lila found a letter on her pillow. Tucked inside was a hand-drawn map. Not a farm as it was, but of what it could be. A garden here. A bench under the tree that had once held Grace's childhood swing. A new coat of paint for the shed. An old bell to hang by the gate. At the bottom, in Grace's handwriting, were just 4 words. This is your home. The final snow came late. Not thick, not lasting. Just a kiss of white over the green. A reminder, a blessing. Jack and Grace stood on the porch, mugs in hand, watching it fall. She leaned into him. Think it'll stick? Not this time. She smiled, watching Lila chase Ginger across the field, laughter ringing like wind chimes. No, she said, but it gave us time. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Or you can share where you are watching from in comment section. Probably a heartwarming story of your own experience, so that the people can know how small acts lead to peaceful and life full of light